I certainly know from what I've found that flying or buying a drone is actually quite simple and easy, and they are relatively cheap as well. But the more difficult part is actually understanding the rules behind it, and some of those rules are actually quite strict, and if you do breach those rules, there are fairly significant consequences too. Hello, welcome to the Project Insight. I'm your host, Macpherson-Wood, and on today's show, we're going to explore why you might want your remote pilot license. When I say remote pilot license, I'm talking about the Australian recognised qualification by the regulatory body CASA, that's the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, and the recognised license that comes with that, or obtaining what they call a remote pilot license. Before we get into it, I know there are certain abbreviations and names that drones are given, which might include UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle, or RPA, or RPAS, which is remotely piloted aircraft and remotely piloted aircraft system. They all essentially mean the same thing, just slightly different abbreviations and naming conventions. The two that the CASA recognise are RPA and RPAS, and that is because, as an example, UAV being unmanned aerial vehicle, the term unmanned doesn't necessarily mean that it's being operated remotely, which is what the legislation and CASA require you to do when operating these drones. So the two words that they refer to all the time are RPA and RPAS. RPAS come in many different types and forms, which may include a fixed wing RPA. They might come in multi-rotors, a several combination of different rotors for powered lift, and many multitudes or different combinations of fixed wing. They also might come in different forms of power, which may be battery power operated drones, or might even be combustion engine drones. So specifically the RPA that we're going to focus on, what is defined in the Civil Aviation Safety Regulation, CASA 1998 document, and the part of the legislation that we follow is Part 101 in this large document. The Part 101 also refers to unmanned aircraft and rockets, which also extends into balloons and different types of aviation, but the area that we're focusing on with the remote pilot license is the RPA, and in the Part 101 of the CASA 1998, there's a section or a subpart called F, and that is the part of the legislation that we follow as RPA operators or remote pilot license holders. CASA 1998 is the primary document that we follow as far as our legislation and restrictions, as well as other documents which include the Part 101 MOS, or Manual of Standards. These two documents, combined with your company operations manuals and your company operational procedures libraries, all form together to be your governing documents and legislation on how you can operate as a remote pilot license holder and operate under your REOC, which is a remote operator certificate. I certainly know from what I've found that flying or buying a drone is actually quite simple and easy, and they are relatively cheap as well. But the more difficult part is actually understanding the rules behind it, and some of those rules are actually quite strict, and if you do breach those rules, there are fairly significant consequences too. And understandably, it is heavily regulated for a reason. You would hate to be the reason that a major airliner aircraft reaches the news because of a drone incident colliding or being a hazard to an aircraft with passengers on it, risking the lives of the crew and the pilots on board of that plane. So why would you get a remote pilot license? There are several different reasons why you might. One might be you want to fly commercially for profit. I know the legislation does allow you to fly commercially if you're operating drones under 2 kilos, but there are a few disadvantages to that, including you're restricted to more tighter regulation. You also often won't get these projects because some clients require to be a remote pilot license holder operating under a REOC. You don't have the opportunity to get insurance, and sometimes you may be competing with other operators with this certification and accreditation, and it does show that you're taking that extra step in safety and following procedures a little bit more stringently, and companies and clients do recognize that and often do choose companies that have this accreditation over those that don't. Other reasons may include that you have drones larger than 2 kilos or wish to fly drones larger than 2 kilos, and having the remote pilot license requires you're required to get the remote pilot license if you want to fly these drones. Another reason why you might get a remote pilot license is if the job that you want to apply for requires you to have one, or maybe the other way around, it's an advantage to have one when seeking for jobs. Companies, there are many different companies all throughout Australia that use drones today, including the field that I'm interested in, which is surveying. And if you do have that remote pilot license, you are definitely a desirable person to have with those skills and that flying experience. A lot of surveying companies today do have drones with them and operate with a REOC. Would I recommend getting a remote pilot license? Generally, I would say yes. While it's not essential, for example, you may be a photographer with a drone that's under 2 kilos, and you're completing fairly low risk jobs, taking photos for clients. Getting that remote or remote pilot license is quite a significant step, and it's very time consuming. So maybe it might not be as critical for you, although I still would recommend it, given there are many more advantages to it, and you do have that safety assurance, and you understand the legislation better because you have to go through those exams and tests before you actually operate as a remote pilot license under a REOC. It is also a great opportunity to build your skills and advance your knowledge, and potentially one day becoming a chief remote pilot for a company where you're responsible for all the remote pilot operations and all the pilots operating under this REOC. And as a chief remote pilot, you do have that next step in responsibility and understanding the aviation law and regulations behind it, and being that direct contact with CASA. So it's definitely a great experience to do that and to advance your skills in being a remote pilot operator. Other advantages might include it's a great stepping stone into becoming an instructor for remote pilot license training schools. If that's a career path you wish to go down, getting that remote pilot license is important. While there is more training to be an instructor. From there, it's a great stepping stone, and it shows that you are dedicated to the profession and the industry. If you're flying drones as a hobby, then maybe it might not be a necessity to get that remote pilot license. You might not be flying very much at all, and the extra time and training and legislation behind it may be quite a lot, and it might not be as important for you to understand all of it, and resulting in may not need this remote pilot license. As a remote pilot, I find that having this license has provided me with really great opportunities, particularly with a large company where you understand the multiple levels of operating under a REOC and all of the legislation behind that, as well as operating and managing a company's operations, and speaking with CASA and liaising with them and updating their manuals to push what is a standard remote pilot license into something a bit more suitable for your company. I've found flying drones has been amazing for my surveying career, allowing me to look into the technology and really advance into that space, the 3D spatial area, where I can use a combination of drones and other surveying equipment to create really amazing projects, including these 3D reality capture models, and providing that next level in quality of outputs to clients, which is something that I really enjoy and really have a passion for that next level in data and presenting things in a way that is really upfront, cutting edge, innovative technology. So it's having that remote pilot license is really important, and it helps build and grow that area of knowledge in the 3D spatial side of things. I think it is a career, not only in surveying, but in many other professions, that it is growing rapidly, and the opportunities with that are also growing too. It's an amazing career path to go down, and I would highly recommend it to those who are interested. And if you do have any questions on the licensing process, or the chief remote pilot process, or even setting up and maintaining company operations manuals and procedures, please send through a message and I'll be sure to help. If you have any other general aviation and remote pilots or RPA questions, please also send through a message and I'll be sure to help.